Welcome to The Disappearing Mind, a unique podcast helping you find clarity and support along your dementia journey. Now, join National Dementia Trainer and Coach Dawn Platt for an all-new episode.
Welcome back to the Disappearing Mind podcast. I'm Dawn Platt, your host, dementia coach, dementia trainer, and daughter of someone who had dementia. I'm starting an episode. I'm going to do 2 episodes on something that's fairly new, something that I've talked with families about, I've experienced myself, and I'm thinking maybe you experienced as well. In this episode, we're going to talk about caregiving for someone with dementia in a social media era. What helps and what hurts. Caregiving has entered into a new era. Conversations that once happened privately in a doctor's office, around kitchen tables, or within trusted relationships and support groups are now unfolding publicly across social media platforms. While this visibility can create connection and shared understanding, it also introduces some new risk. We cannot always verify who is offering us advice, what their credentials are, or what their intentions may be. In this environment, misinformation, exaggerated claims, emotional influence, and even financial scams can spread quickly, especially in and around things like medication, supplements, or treatment approaches. There are a lot of claims out there, folks. This is the reality of caregiving in a social media era. Access to information seems to be everywhere, but is it accurate? Which means that when we're caregiving in a social media era, access has increased, but so has vulnerability. It requires discernment on our part, thoughtful evaluation, and commitment to double checking the information that we see and hear before making decisions that affect our loved ones' health and safety. Today, we're talking about something that didn't exist for caregivers 20 years ago and now shapes almost every part of the experience. Buckle up. Get a pen and piece of paper, grab a cup of coffee or tea, and let's kind of get into this and unpack this episode for you. What does caregiving in the social media era even mean? Because caregiving used to be private, now it's public. It's searchable. You can search anywhere in regards to caregiving, and you'll get lots of information. It's scrollable. It's monetized. It's judged. How good are you? Are you good? Are you doing the right things? It's supported and it's amplified. And the question we're exploring today is social media helping caregivers or is it quietly harming them? The answer, as you might expect, is both. Today, we'll unpack all of these areas that I want you to consider. What helps? What hurts? Ethical considerations, emotional impact, clinical misinformation, and how to evaluate what you consume. That's really important. So let's begin. The first area I want to talk about is the good. And I think there's a lot of good. I'm not doing this podcast to have you avoid social media or the support that's out there, but how social media helps caregivers. Let's start with what's working, because there are real benefits to what's working for people. And I'll say it is easier for me, as in the podcast, and it's easier for you as a caregiver to connect with other people and their experience. One of the things that social media helps caregivers do is provide validation and normalization. Let's face it, caregiving can be isolating. When someone posts things like, my mom refused to bathe again, dad was up pacing all night, or I lost my patience, It is relatable, and it really makes you feel like you're not alone. You're not abnormal. And hundreds of comments say things like, "Me too. You're not alone. That's dementia." This is powerful. It's powerful to have an audience, to have a social media group that you can relate to, that you feel understands you. The other thing that families describe to me, and even people that I coach, say that it kind of reduces shame, especially if you have a loved one who is really expressional in behaviors and you lose your patience every now and then. You may feel embarrassed or ashamed. It reduces self-blame, which is something that many of us in caregiving may experience from time to time, and it normalizes the experience. When you're in a social media group and everyone in there has a loved one with dementia, we're all in the same boat, and it really makes it easier to have conversation, to build virtual friendships, and a lot of other things that we're going to unpack here today. For caregivers who don't have local support groups, social media can become a 24/7 support framework. You may not have support groups, or there may be support groups available in your area, but perhaps they don't fit your work schedule or your family schedule, or you just don't have the time, or they don't fit your needs, your model. That's when people turn to social media for information, for connection. The other thing that I think we have to consider in the social media setting in regards to caregiving is access to education. We now have at our fingertips dementia educators, neurologists, dietitians, occupational therapists, and oftentimes they're sharing great tips like redirection techniques. I do that here on the podcast. Communication strategies, another resource I have available. Environmental modifications. They talk about brain health research and outcomes. That kind of access used to require conferences and specialized clinics. Now it's in your feed. You can Google a lot of this information and get some fairly decent resources that are out there and available to you. It really homogenizes and regulates the educational material that we can have access to. The other thing social media does in this setting is it helps break the stigma. Many people still today, when the dementia diagnosis comes into play, a lot of people are embarrassed or experience shame or aren't really open to sharing that with some of their friendships and relationships, or maybe even work relationships. Social media has helped normalize the diagnosis. It has helped normalize early diagnosis, which is a whole different area of dementia and a whole different set of circumstances that people who experience early diagnosis have to deal with. It normalizes placement in memory care. People share the memory cares that they have their loved ones in, how they navigated that, what's available. Memory cares have Facebook pages, so you can go and visit and see what they're actually doing, what they're offering. That is a real valuable tool. It normalizes talking about anger and grief. One of the many areas that people feel a lot more freedom in writing about, in blogging about, and putting out there to perfect strangers is they're coping with anger and grief, the fact of how they feel. I think it's because in social media, there's not a real person there who's looking at you. And it allows people, whether they post it or not, to read what others are going through and normalize that, whether you're the one out there talking or you're in the background relating to what someone else is seeing. So for many families, that silence around dementia has been worse than the disease itself. Having no one to talk to and no one else to relate to. So social media platforms have cracked that wide open for families, and that really matters. let's shift a little bit and talk about what hurts caregivers when it comes to social media, caregiving, and dementia. Let's shift that scenario because I think it's really important to talk about this side too. Many families that I work with have experienced some negative along the way, and I want to talk about that because there are unintended consequences when we go into social media. It doesn't really matter what platform. There's what we call the comparison culture. And I think that whether it's with fashion or something along that line, when it comes to caregiving, there is a comparison culture. You see the endless patient daughter who seems to have it all together. You see the perfectly calm husband, the beautifully organized medication stations, and the inspirational caregiving montage that people put out there and display. But what you don't see and what many don't talk about is the meltdown at 2 a.m. after repeated times of redirecting your loved one back to bed with very little sleep, by the way. You don't see the resentment that people can and do experience when caregiving becomes difficult. You don't see necessarily the financial strain that people are going through or how they have to change their budgets to compensate for dementia care, or the marriage tension. Even a good marriage, when adding caregiving into that, can put a strain on the best of marriages. Comparisons distorts reality. So just be sure that when you're using social media, that you realize that you're getting a partial story, perhaps a confabulated story, perhaps the best of the best, and very little of the worst. So when caregivers compare their worst moments to someone else's highest reel, shame can grow, fear can grow, discontentment, comparisons can grow. These are things that I want you to be aware of. And let's face it, dementia isn't the same. Those that we care for aren't the same. They don't have the same diagnosis. They're not in the same stages. They don't have the same behaviors or lack of. They don't have the same access to cultural support, physician support, healthcare support in general. Here's an evaluation question that I want you to jot down and ask, especially if you can relate to what I'm talking about. Am I consuming content that makes me feel supported? Or am I consuming content that makes me feel inadequate? That's a good question for you to ask yourself, and really a balancing point of how much social media content that you consume in regards to caregiving, care options, the dementia journey in general, because there is a lot of good information, but there's also a lot of misinformation out there on social media. Let's talk about misinformation and oversimplification. I see this a lot. I do engage in social media. I do comment. I do belong to multiple support groups and networks on social media that I run up a red flag. I'm not always controversial about, but I'm not going to have those folks on the podcast. I'm going to tell you that. There's a lot of hype and there's a lot of claims. So I want you to be very cautious. If you're on social media and you see something like reverse dementia naturally, these claims are there and they're very hopeful. They cast a lot of hope, a lot of options for people. But listen, folks, there is no research behind it. If that were true, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I'm not saying it's not ever true or hasn't ever happened. I'm saying that it's a hype and it could be very disappointing to you in the long run. And I want you to invest in your physician, invest in your healthcare team, and believe them and let them guide you. The other thing you might see, and it's a hook, And that is the phrase, doctors won't tell you this, but I will. These are things that is going to lead you in an area that could be detrimental to your dementia caregiving journey and to the outcome of your loved one. The other thing that you might see, and I want you to totally be aware of, is pharmaceuticals are the problem. That is a loaded statement. It basically says that you probably shouldn't use them. Well, that's not true. And there are many symptoms and there are many conditions in the many different types of dementia that we see that have treatment. Treatment is not a cure, but treatment certainly minimizes symptoms and helps you support the individual, helps the individual have less anxiety, perhaps less behaviors, perhaps less pain, lots of things. So be aware of that. And I know that we'd all like to be natural, and I know that we'd all like our doctor to tell us everything, but let's face it, our doctors don't know everything. They don't know everything, and they're not expected to. They are the medical experts that we invest in and that we follow and that we feel like will help us on the treatment journey. And if you're going to go to a doctor, then trust what that doctor says and follow what that doctor says. Otherwise, what he tells you absolutely is not going to work for you because you're not following his prescription. Dementia is very complex. It is neurodegeneration. There is no universal reversal protocol. The claims that you're hearing actually aren't there. There are some things that are out there that might make your journey better, that do show promising results and good results, but there is no cure. And if there were a cure, it would be touted from the highest mountain. So I don't want what you read on social media to create false hope for you and then end in disappointment because you hook, line, and sinker believed what was written in a social media post. The other thing that I want to really caution you on is undermining the trust in your physician. I cannot tell you enough. They go to school a long time. They do the best that they can do. And I believe that overall, overarchingly, that physicians deserve your trust and they do the best that they can do for care. But this is a horrific disease. It does not have a cure, and it is progressive in nature. Don't do things that are contrary to and undermine the trust of your physician. The other thing that I am concerned about, and a point that I wrote down, is delaying appropriate care. Delayed care options, delayed treatment options, delayed diagnosis is not going to take you where you want to go. I'm a huge proponent of supplements and all the things, but I also know that there's not one case of true diagnosis, true real diagnosis that this is going to help. If there's a nutritional deficit or there's another problem and it's treated, I've told you this, it's out there. Yes, it's going to make a difference. And a lot of symptoms can be reversed once a medical condition is treated. And those are one-offs. They're not true diagnosis of the progressive neurodegenerative diseases under the umbrella of dementia. Let's look at a few questions, evaluation questions that I want you to jot down so that you're not just listening to me, not just taking my opinion, but you're asking these real questions, especially if you've encountered a social media post or you're in a conversation on social media and you're wondering, is it valid? Here's some questions, 3 questions here. Is this information coming from a credentialed professional? My experience as a daughter of someone having dementia, a loved one having dementia, is my experience as a daughter. I am going to be pretty reluctant to take medication advice from someone who is not credentialed. They can tell me their story. I can relate to their story, but it's really important that you know the credentials and the motives of someone who is giving you advice? Is this peer-reviewed, researched, or is there an anecdotal testimony behind it? One story does not validate an opinion. And I think it's really important, especially if it's a major decision or a major treatment or lack of treatment. You're going to want to do some research. And the third question is, does this advice apply universally, or is it case specific? And I will tell you, there's not a support group that I'm in, with one exception. And I'm not sure it's always an exception. Generally, we're talking about multiple kinds of dementia on a support group, not one kind. There are over 120 types. They all manifest different with different symptoms, different progression, and different treatment mechanisms. Is this a universal application or case specific? If someone has Lewy body dementia, it is not treated the same way someone with Alzheimer's disease is treated. There are different approaches, different courses, and different treatments. If someone is giving you advice, be sure to ask what type of dementia that they have dealt with, or what type of dementia does their loved one have. It truly makes a difference. They are not all the same. And when you take that bit of advice out there and you apply that one question, it's going to highlight where you need to be cautionary. Caregivers deserve evidence-based guidance, not algorithm-driven content. You do know that when you look up something, it's going to create an algorithm, and that's going to drive that content to you. That does not make it factual. It does not make it popular. It's just the way social media works. There's an emotional contagion and a doom scrolling side, an emotional connection side to social media when it comes to dementia and dementia caregiving that I also want to talk about. Here's something we don't talk about enough. If you search one video about dementia, that algorithm is going to feed you lots of things. Late stage decline, institutional horror stories, worst case emotional scenarios. Suddenly, your entire feed can be stuck on end stage disease, and perhaps you're at the beginning of a disease. That's how it works. This can increase anxiety. It can give you good information, but not appropriate information for your particular case. And I want you to understand that this is going to skew your perception. It can make caregivers believe that what they're talking about is inevitable for every type of dementia, or this is coming tomorrow. Not everyone exhibits behaviors. Not everyone exhibits the same behaviors. Not all treatments are appropriate for all types and stages of dementia. Those are the things I just want to point out to you when you are caregiving and using social media. Is your feed reflecting reality, or is the algorithm preference for high emotion content? Is it capturing you? Is it hooking you? I mean, that's what it is set up to do. Just remember this, the algorithm rewards engagement. If you're engaged in something, that's not balance, that's not necessarily accuracy, and it's not nuance. It is because you looked at it, so it's going to send it to you again. Then there's the ethical layer, the privacy and dignity. This is where what we're going to talk about gets a little bit more serious. We now see, and this is questionable, I will tell you, privacy and dignity are important. You, as a caregiver, don't fall under HIPAA, but there is a privacy and dignity line that I think you need to talk about. When you post videos that show your loved one in an agitative state, it's a little bit more serious. It's a privacy and dignity issue that we need to think about. When you post clips of your loved one confused or distressed, would they want that? Is that something they would want? And I know that you feel like these can be helpful, and I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm just asking you to think about it. Emotional breakdowns filmed in real time. I mean, these are private moments that people are experiencing. This is family experience. Often these are posted for awareness, education, but sometimes it's for monetization. We must ask ourselves this question. Would this person have consented to this being shared publicly? Would you be airing their dirty laundry? And would they like it? Dementia removes the ability to give informed consent. I want to make that statement. So that does not remove their dignity, does not remove their right to dignity. Let's consider a few things when we're talking about this ethical layer. Does this content protect the individual's identity? Is it educational or is it emotionally driven? And am I sharing to advocate or am I seeking validation? These points are not about judgment on my part, but it's really about ethical reflection. That's what we're talking about today. Caregiving is sacred work. It's private work. It's family work. And sacred work deserves discretion. Be very careful at what you're putting out there and whether or not it is something that you would do if your loved one had another disease and not dementia. Some caregivers build platforms. They become influencers, they advocate, they monetize, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when caregiving becomes identity and brand, there's got to be a balance there. And this is reality today. This is something that even 10 years ago, we really didn't face a lot of. There's empowerment in this, but there's also risk. When caregiving becomes your brand, when you are in that role and your role ends, where are you going to be? What happens when your loved one passes away? And there are people grieving who may see what you're doing as a public performance. I mean, you have to ask yourself, and certainly I'm not judging you, but it is something to consider. And I know there are a lot of good platforms that are doing educational. They want to share. They want people to know. They don't want people to go through what they've gone through. And I think that is terrific. I'm just pointing out these points that nobody talks about, that I'm going to talk about because they're real. They're reality for us. That identity fusion can complicate healing, can complicate grieving. Ask yourself if you're one of those people, is my online presence supporting my well-being or tying my identity solely to this illness? And I think that one of the things we can say for sure, and I've talked about this, how caregivers lose their sense of self and they go from wife to caregiver, from daughter to caregiver. All of those things are real. That's a question that you need to ask yourself. Community impact. I think that families now use social media. It's reshaped expectations. I think that community, meaning memory care community, you can research and search communities on Facebook, on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube. I think that there is this comparison that may not be fair and that you may want to consider what's being shared may not be your scenario, may not be the market you live in, may not be the access that you have in your particular area. So transparency is going to be very positive, knowing or stating that one size does not fit all when it comes to caregiving. The damage can come, and it can come in trust. It can come in being told something that perhaps isn't really accurate. I want to start closing and talk about the pros and cons here. I think there are both. I want you to know what the pros are, but I want you to know what the cons are. And I'm going to do a separate episode in regards to when social media becomes negative and gives you more emotional baggage to carry. But what does social media help? How can it help you? And what are the areas that you can look for? And remind yourself, it does help with community and validation, connects you to others in your boat, and helps you understand you're not the only one. And that's what we say as professionals all the time. You are not alone, and you're not. Gives you educational access, lots of education, diverse education. And hopefully you can sift through that and find what's appropriate for you and your loved one. It reduces the stigma of dementia, the word dementia. It shares coping strategies and coping mechanisms. Again, some of those coping mechanisms may not fit you, but having a handful of them to try is really a positive thing. There's some humor and emotional release on social media when people get real, when they tell jokes, and it just really is a real release, I think, for families who are on the caregiving journey. Those are the things that help. Now let's talk about what hurts. Comparison and shame. One family may be able to do this, may have the support, may have the finances to do all of these things that you don't have the support for and you don't have the finances for. That's when comparison and shame is going to come in. You are in your boat and you have to row your own boat. Be sure not to compare yourself to others. There's lots of misinformation out there. The algorithm-driven fear, I talked to you about that. Stay away from that. Do not get into something and then see it over and over again. Privacy violations, we talked about that. Identity over infusion. We want to identify ourselves, but we don't want social media to become our identity. And then emotional overload. A lot of times there'll be a weight and an expectation on social media that is kind of like having 50 relatives call you and ask how things are going. Although you want to tell them all, it's just an overload to repeat it over and over again. Those are just some of the pros and cons of social media in the caregiving journey. Here's some things I want you to ask yourself before I close, and that is, before engaging or posting, I want you to ask yourself, is this supporting my emotional health? Solid question. Is what I'm reading evidence-based, or is it just the opinions of people on this app? And does this protect my loved one's dignity? And is that important to me? Those are 3 questions that I think are going to clearly help you decide and navigate all of these things. And I know social media is realistic to everyone now of every age group, but we're not really talking about the pros and the cons when it comes to the dementia caregiving journey. And that's why I created this podcast today. I will probably delve into this more and do more of this. But social media is a tool. It can help or it can harm. And tools can be built and tools can harm. The difference is intention and awareness. We've talked about scams on the podcast before. When you become vulnerable on social media, you become a target for a scam. Be aware of that. In closing, I want to say to you that caregiving has always been difficult, but now it's visible, which takes it into the public, which documents it, which is shared in real time. That visibility, although it can reduce your isolation and it can educate and it can empower, but it can also distort what's important to you, to your loved one with dementia, and to your family. As caregivers and professionals, we must engage thoughtfully and with purpose. There's some things you're allowed to do. You are allowed to log off. You're allowed to protect privacy. You're allowed to set digital boundaries. You're allowed to seek real-life support. And you are allowed to curate your feed intentionally so that you are getting and seeing what you're interested in. The feed is not the full story. Your caregiving journey does not have to be performed to be valid. You are going to make mistakes. You don't have to know it all. If this episode is resonating with you, consider sharing it, not as a performance, but as a conversation. This is Dawn Platt. This was a dementia coaching series today because I want you to understand how social media can help and hurt you. Thank you for joining me on the Disappearing Mind podcast. Until next time, make it a memorable day.
Thank you for joining us for the Disappearing Mind podcast. We hope it's helped you find clarity and support along your journey. Be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode, visit our website to suggest future topics, and share the podcast with friends and family.